You have 30 days to move out, my mother said with a sly smile as her immaculately straight nails capped the surface of my kitchen counter. We sold your apartment to Lisa. I was standing in my bright kitchen, the same space where I had prepared innumerable family meals, started my own catering company, and cared for my grandmother in her last days. The room felt almost unreal as the early light created lengthy shadows on the hardwood flooring she had assisted me in restoring. At the age of 35, I, Sarah Mitchell, never thought I would be facing eviction from my own house by my own family. My brother James added, "Don't look so shocked," from next to her, his arms securely encircling his wife Lisa's shoulders. "You usually travel for your catering events, so you seldom ever utilize this property anyhow. Now that the baby is on the way, Lisa needs a suitable place to live." The infant. Naturally, like throughout our upbringing, Lisa's pregnancy had become the newest justification for the family to give my brother whatever he desired. I sipped my coffee slowly, relishing the fleeting look of surprise on my mother's face when she saw how composed I was. "And you thought selling my apartment was the solution?" After taking out a packet of documents, my mother remarked, "Well, it's not technically yours anymore. Remember that when you moved in, your father and I kept our names on the deed, for taxation's sake." Her grin became rapacious. "Yesterday, we signed the documents. Within 30 days, Lisa and James take possession." I reflected about the final talk I'd had with my grandma a few weeks prior to her death. Despite her deteriorating condition, she had been sitting in this very kitchen, her eyes alert. She cautioned, "They'll try to take it from you. Your mother never did forgive me for not giving her this building when she married your father." The building itself was a stunning pre-war edifice in one of the city's most sought-after areas, and the apartment had been in my grandmother's family for decades, expecting to inherit everything. My mother had grown up here. My grandma, however, had other ideas. She informed me, "I know what you did with the money I gave you." While I was kneading dough for her favorite rolls that day, putting money into your company, constructing a tangible object. Not like Lisa with her Instagram lifestyle brand or James with his failed companies. She had extracted an envelope from her purse. "Preserve this. Wait until you really need to inform them." I could feel the weight of that envelope in my desk drawer upstairs as I stood in my kitchen, confronting the betrayal of my family. "In fact," I continued, maintaining a steady tone, "we ought to talk about something." I could hear their frustrated sighs behind me as I made my way to my office. I had converted the second bedroom into a work area, something my mother had never approved of. She had sniffed. A proper lady needs a proper guest room. I came back with my own folder, well kept yet ragged at the corners. "Before we talk about me moving out, you might want to see this." "What is that?" Speaking for the first time, Lisa inquired. With one palm resting on her barely perceptible bulge, she seemed uneasy. I just said, "The real deed," and placed it on the counter, and the proof of ownership for the building next door. As my mother reviewed the paperwork, her face turned pale. My grandmother's distinctive signature was used to sign and notarize two properties that were transferred to my name 3 years ago. My parents had never owned the flat. To maintain harmony, my grandmother had left their names on the leasing agreement, but the property had gone straight to me. I heard my mother stutter, This can't be legal," her calm exterior erupting. "Oh, it's legal," I told her. "Mr. Patterson handled everything himself." My grandma flinched at the mention of her longtime attorney. "You might wish to verify that your transaction to Lisa and James is legitimate. Selling something you don't own is difficult." James's cheeks took on an intriguing crimson hue as he snatched up the papers. "You were aware of this the entire time? You permitted us to complete the deal." I confessed, "I learned about your plans weeks ago. Grandmother always said it's better to let people show their true colors." There was an overwhelming quiet in my kitchen. Lisa seemed sick, slumped into one of my bar stools. My mom continued to gaze at the deed as if she could alter it with her own willpower. When she finally responded, "You should have told us," her voice was tense with rage. Like you should have told me you were selling my home, I retorted. The house where I've spent a decade. The house where, when none of you would, I looked after grandmother. The late evenings spent juggling grandmother's care, and my budding catering company came rushing back. James is too preoccupied with his most recent endeavor to assist. It was handy for my parents to go during the most difficult months. While they continued as normal, certain that they would soon get control of the building, I put my life on hold. What are we supposed to do now? Quietly, Lisa inquired. We already sold our apartment. I felt a little sorry for her. Lisa had always seemed to be striving to satisfy everyone while getting caught up in the complexities of my family. I said, I'm not heartless. There is an unoccupied third-floor apartment in the building next door. It's actually the same layout as this one. It is available for rent at market value. Rent? James blew up. From my own sister? Would you prefer to find something else in the neighborhood? I asked gently. I've heard there are opportunities at the new upscale building down the street. Their 2 bedrooms, of course, start at double what I'm asking. Suddenly, my mother sprang up and gathered her documents in trembling hands. She said, This isn't over. But her tone lacked confidence. Your grandmother had no right. I said, She had every right. She decided how to leave her legacy, which was this structure. Excuse me now, but I need to talk about some security system improvements with my property manager. James refused to look me in the eyes as I watched them file out. How Lisa followed them after lingering for a time as if she wanted to say something. Last but not least, my mother paused at the doorway. She remarked, You've changed, but I wasn't sure if it was an indictment or an epiphany. No, I answered. I just stopped pretending to be who you wanted me to be. I strolled about my apartment after they departed, touching the walls that my grandmother and I had painted together and gazing out the windows where we had seen innumerable sunsets. I unlocked the drawer in my office and took out her envelope, which still included her final note to me but was now missing its important papers. Remember, she'd scribbled down, Sometimes being ready is the finest kind of retaliation. Allowing individuals to bear the consequences of their own choices might occasionally be the best gift we can give them. Thinking of how she had anticipated this year's prior made me grin. Lisa sent me a text, and my phone buzzed. Is it possible to discuss the unit next door? Only us? Perhaps, I reasoned, there might be some upside to all of this. I had to improve my security system first, though. After all, being prepared meant remaining prepared, as grandmother used to say. Unaware of the drama that had just taken place in my kitchen, the world outside continued to bustle. I had to manage houses, operate a catering business, work, and maintain a distance from my family. But for the time being, I simply stood in my house, in my kitchen, and allowed myself to experience the silent fulfillment that comes from holding my ground. There was a rush of activity in the following days that I hadn't expected. My father, who had conveniently missed the first altercation, began by making irate calls. He replied, Your mother is beside herself, with that recognizable tone of disappointment in his voice. How could you embarrass the family like this? As he phoned, I was in my catering kitchen getting ready for a wedding that was taking place over the weekend. Embarrass the family? I did it again, piping rosettes onto a 3-tier cake with care. By being a property owner, or by preventing you from selling my house unlawfully. Sarah, don't be tough. Our goal was to assist your brother. Family supports family. Funny, I said as I took a step back to review my work. During grandmother's last months, I was sleeping on a cot in her room, and I don't recall any of you helping me, or when I was starting my company from the ground up. His silence said more than words could. He sighed at last. Your mother wants to speak with our lawyer about challenging the deed. Calmly, she can try, I said. All the paperwork, including recordings showing grandmother signing the documents and outlining her choices, is in Mr. Patterson's possession. However, you are free to choose to spend money on legal expenses rather than face reality. He hung up, and then I had a surprise guest. Without James or my mother by her side, Lisa stood clumsily at the doorway of my kitchen, appearing somehow smaller. With one hand on her little baby bulge, she said, "Can we talk?" I brought peace offerings. She displayed a bag from my preferred bakery. I pointed to one of the prep counter stools. "Those better be their lemon tarts." As she took out the well-known white box, she forced a little grin. "And croissants with chocolate. I recall that last year, during the wedding season, you overindulged in them." For a while, we sat quietly as the vanilla cake I was making blended with the delightful scent of sugar and butter. Lisa finally said anything, silently. "I didn't know," she murmured. "Almost any of it. James informed me that the flat was a baby present from your parents. I never considered." She seemed bewildered as she drifted off. "You never thought they were trying to steal it from me?" "Forker," I completed. She nodded but winced. "James said they discussed it with you, that you were fine with moving to a smaller place since your business takes up so much of your time anyway." She avoided looking at me as she picked at a croissant. "I should have asked you directly." I remembered Lisa, who had come into our home 4 years ago with such a desire to please everyone and stars in her eyes. By encouraging her to abandon her teaching profession because a proper wife doesn't need to work, and supporting her costly taste because appearances matter in this family, when Mother and James gradually shaped her into their ideal, which I had witnessed. I answered, "The apartment next door," which surprised me. "The deal is still valid. The similar arrangement on the 3rd story. I wanted to do some renovations before advertising it, and the prior renters recently left." With a glimmer of optimism, Lisa raised her head. "Really? Even after?" "With a firm, on one condition," I said. "We keep this between us. No manipulation of the family, no rushing to my mother over everything. It's a commercial agreement if you and James decide to rent it. I'll pay you a reasonable amount, but I demand professionalism from you." "James won't like that," the woman acknowledged. "He thinks family shouldn't have to pay family." "And how's that working out for him?" I inquired, recalling his run of unsuccessful ventures, all of which were financed by my parents' apparently limitless tolerance. Maybe it's time for something different. Lisa rubbed her tummy absently and remained silent for a while. "Is it visible to me, the apartment?" I reached for my keys. No time like the present. Constructed by the same architect in the 1920s, the building next door was a perfect replica of mine. Although the 3rd-floor flat required some renovation, old kitchen, scratched hardwood flooring, the structure was sound. The arrangement was ideal for an expanding family, and the room was flooded with natural light from large windows. As Lisa ran her palm over the original crown molding, she said, "It's beautiful. Even like this, it's beautiful." "It needs updating," I said. However, I had already planned the complete refurbishment. "Make it uniquely yours by contributing to the finishes if you're interested." With tears in her eyes, she turned to face me. "Why are you treating me so nicely? Following our attempts?" "Simply put, because you're the only one who's apologized," I said. "And because I think you might be ready to stop letting them make your decisions for you." The family group chat that I had muted days before buzzed on both of our phones at that very moment. An emergency family meeting was scheduled for this weekend, according to a lengthy note from my mother. "Your father and I have made some decisions about the future of both properties," she stated in her letter. "Attendance is mandatory." Lisa's face flashed with dread as she stared at me. "What are they planning?" I didn't read the entire message before deleting it. "There is nothing important. Remember, these structures are not theirs. They are free to plan anything they choose." "James will expect me to go," she muttered. "They'll all expect us to present a united front against you." "And what do you want?" She surveyed the place once more, absorbing its possibilities. When she eventually said, "I want to make my own decision. I want my child to grow up in a house that truly belongs to us, even if it's being rented. Not anything that has been stolen." I took out my phone and quickly composed an email to send to my contractor. By next week, I can have designs for renovations created. The first month is free while the work is being done. Then the lease is standard with fair market rate. However, Lisa, I waited till we looked at each other. You must make this choice. Not my mother's, not James's, yours. She seemed more certain than I had seen her in a long time as she straightened her shoulders. I'd like to see those plans when they're ready. My father sent me another text as we made our way back downstairs. Your mom is investigating her legal alternatives. Don't make us go any farther. Lisa shook her head when I presented it to her. They really don't know when to stop, do they? No, I concurred, but they're about to learn. Something was changing, as I could see by Lisa's resolute attitude. The formerly seemingly unchangeable dynamics of the family were starting to give way to new opportunities. Perhaps this was about more than simply keeping my things safe. Perhaps it was about disrupting long-standing patterns that ought to have been disrupted. Want to help me finish decorating that wedding cake? I inquired. I seem to remember you being pretty good at flower arranging before my mother decided it wasn't sophisticated enough for you. This time, her grin was sincere. That would be nice. And thank you, Sarah, not only for the flat, but also for demonstrating to me that there is an alternative approach to problems. I remembered my grandmother's remarks as we made our way back to my kitchen. The finest retaliation isn't always about getting even. Sometimes it's about teaching others how to escape as well. On Sunday afternoon, the family got together at my parents' large suburban house. Prior to Lisa calling me in tears the night before, I had no intention of going. They're planning something, she said. James continues to speak with your father's attorney in private. They are discussing contesting the bequest, arguing that grandmother was incompetent when she gave you all of the documents. Sitting in my office, I gazed at the framed picture of my grandmother and me during the launch of my catering business. Calmly, let them try, I replied. Video records of every meeting and signing are in Mr. Patterson's possession. Grandmother was well versed in her actions. There's more, said Lisa. They want to play the game of we have greater right to the properties since we're beginning a family, by taking advantage of my pregnancy. James is unaware that I am telling you this. For the first time, I considered Lisa defying my family and putting loyalty aside in favor of the truth. I appreciate you alerting me. Are you going to be there tomorrow? Yes, she firmly said. And I'm done playing their games. Grandmother would have cherished the ideal fall day that Sunday brought. I noticed the group of automobiles already at my parents' house when I pulled up on time. For the concert, the entire family had assembled. The tension was thick enough to sever within. My father stood behind my mother as she sat like a queen holding court in her favorite armchair. While other aunts and uncles occupied the remaining chairs, James paced by the window. As I walked in, Lisa sat a little apart and looked up at me. Sarah, remarked my mother icily, so glad you decided to join us. Wouldn't miss it, I said, staying upright. Though I'm curious why we're here, since the property situation is already settled. My dad came forward with a folder that seemed familiar. We have been going over the specifics of your grandmother's choices. Our attorney is worried about her mental health throughout those last several months. Really? I spoke with a level tone. The months when I was caring for her while all of you were too busy. You manipulated her, said James immediately. Turned her against us while she was vulnerable. Lisa got up before I could reply. No, she didn't. Remember, I've been there once. When did none of you come? Grandma was as observant as ever. She was well aware of her actions. There was silence in the room. James gazed in disbelief at his wife. Sit down, Lisa. You don't care about this, doesn't it? She took a position next to me. You're attempting to exploit our baby as a pretext to steal a house. I refused to participate. My mom's expression worsened. You're unhappy, Lisa, my dear. Hormones during pregnancy. Don't. Lisa interrupted her. Avoid trying to ignore me. Sarah gave us the opportunity to create our own home, a lovely apartment, and a reasonable rent. But you don't think that's enough? Everything must be yours. Take charge of everything. I took out my phone and started playing a video. Before this goes any further, you should watch something. Grandmother's face appeared on the TV screen as soon as I connected. In the video, she stated, "I'm recording this because I know my daughter. When she got married, I didn't give her authority of the buildings, and she never forgiven me. However, property is about stewardship as much as possession. Sarah is aware of that. She has created something tangible and assisted others in realizing their aspirations. The properties are legally and completely hers. Any effort to dispute this will simply expose your own avarice." The film went on to show grandmother signing paperwork, expressing her intentions clearly, and Mr. Patterson confirming everything. The stillness was deafening when it was over. "There's more," I muttered. "Demands of records. Do you want to view the medical reports attesting to her competence? The statements of the witnesses? To what extent do you wish to pursue this?" My dad dropped his folder. My mom's face had turned white. However, James caught me off guard. He remarked, "You knew, to Lisa. You were aware of the next-door flat. You have been conversing with her." Lisa's back straightened. "Yes, as she is the only one who has been truthful. The only one who gave us a genuine opportunity, free from deception and manipulation." "The renovation plans are drawn up," I said, "if you're still up for it. However, this is now over. No more dangers, no more difficulties. I own the buildings, and that's all." My mom got up suddenly. "I believe you should all go. We need time to think about this." Lisa grabbed my arm as we left. She remarked, "I'd like to see those renovation plans, loud enough for everyone to hear, for our new home." The grass was covered in lengthy shadows as the fall sun sank outside. Together, Lisa and I left the noises of the dispute in the home and headed to our cars. She remarked, "You know they'll never forgive us." Grandmother's remarks about stewardship and creating something tangible came to mind. Perhaps, but instead, we'll construct something better. After 6 months, I saw Lisa put fresh flowers in the bright kitchen of the recently remodeled apartment next door. The nursery down the hall was prepared and waiting, and her baby belly was much more noticeable now. Warm oak flooring, airy, light-filled rooms, and a kitchen that equaled mine were all features of the renovated apartment. The marble countertops were worth every penny, Lisa remarked as she rearranged one of the stems. Her passion for flower arrangement had returned, and she even launched a little side company creating centerpieces for my catering events. Though James is still adjusting to the rent payments. There had been major changes in the months after the family dispute. James had finally accepted a legitimate job at a consulting business after facing the prospect of losing both his wife's support and his parents' financial security. Lisa said that he was more focused and less entitled at home, even if he wasn't talking to me yet. Prior to hesitant acceptance, my parents had attempted the silent treatment, followed by emotional guilt trips. When my mother arrived at my home during the holidays, looking older and uncharacteristically unsure, it was a turning point. She added, "I've been thinking about what your grandmother said, without looking directly into my eyes, concerning stewardship, about creating something tangible." She had inhaled deeply. I didn't construct anything. I simply assumed that I would be handed stuff. I considered how much had changed as I watched Lisa get ready for her impending baby shower, the first family gathering since the altercation. "Your mother RSVP'd," Lisa replied, interpreting my thoughts. She asked if she could bring her lemon squares. I arched an eyebrow. The famous lemon squares she never shared the recipe for. She offered to teach me how to make them. Lisa grinned. "Baby steps, right?" My property manager had left a message on my buzzing phone regarding a long-term renter who needs some repairs. Both buildings were thriving under my leadership. As I watched fresh ambitions take root and blossom, I launched a program that assisted small company owners in renting commercial facilities at affordable prices. "Miss Mitchell." From the corridor came a voice. One of my commercial tenants, Maria, had a profitable alteration company in the property. I brought the nursery's drapes. Additionally, I made some empanadas using my grandmother's recipe. Grandmother had envisioned a village where people helped one another and built something together. I snuck away to my own apartment while Lisa and Maria spoke about the curtains, eat, and tell stories. Grandmother's final letter was in the bottom drawer of my office, which I opened. Her sentences were still readable despite the paper's wear. Sarah, real estate is more than just buildings. It's about establishing areas where communities may flourish and where individuals can develop. In a manner that your mother did not, you comprehend that. My thoughts were interrupted by a knock at my door. I was shocked to see it was James. He said, appearing uneasy but resolute, "Can we talk?" About everything. As I assisted Lisa in wrapping up the baby shower arrangements later that night, I considered family, not only the family we are born into, but the family we create for ourselves. It was home. We created the entire community, not just the apartment, and it was constructed on a sturdy basis this time. My goal is to be able to give back to my parents for their generosity. My early thoughts were influenced by my parents' love and hard work, which is why I started thinking this way. They worked hard to support my future and found the money for my schooling despite their lack of income. I responded by doing everything I could, and after high school, I set my sights on a private institution. However, there were budgetary limitations. To help me, though, my parents looked into school loans and scholarships. By concentrating on my academics and striving for a merit-based scholarship, I was able to lessen my family's financial burden while attending university. My parents did, however, contribute to some of the expenses for food, rent, and supplies. I maintained my grades until graduation, when I was offered a position at a prestigious international corporation, after moving on to further study and juggling my studies with part-time work. I felt like I was finally beginning to give back to my parents for all of their hard work once I graduated from college. My new existence was motivated by my desire to support my parents via my own efforts. However, I worked for a very competitive international corporation, and I was under constant pressure to produce. I made a lot of blunders in my first year and received a lot of reprimands from my manager. I persisted in working hard in spite of this, motivated by the need to provide for my family. I earned my seniors' and superiors' trust as I adapted to the task and discovered effective approaches to deliver outcomes. After 5 years with the organization, I was given additional responsibilities and elevated to team leader. I had chances for promotions and salary increases as a result of my efforts, and I routinely received great ratings on performance reviews. By saving carefully, I was able to progressively create a comfortable financial buffer over time. One day in my 10th year, I felt compelled to express my appreciation to my parents in a concrete manner. My savings had nearly reached the desired amount by then, and my income had leveled out. I was thinking of a scheme to give my folks a new home as a present. Their ancient single-family home, where they had lived for a long time, was falling apart all around. I wanted to give them a decent living space and release them from that everyday existence. I was worried that our parents had been having problems with my younger sister. Being the second daughter, she had been pampered from an early age and had become dependent on our parents as an adult. I wanted to give back to my parents in some manner, even if they also chose not to take her away from them by force. I so began my quest for the ideal home. I mostly searched for houses in the neighborhood where my parents had lived for a long time, choosing several that were near hospitals, easy to get to public transportation, and had handy shopping. I went to real estate offices on the weekends, went to model rooms several times, and went to viewings in an effort to find a home that would, as much as possible, satisfy my parents. When I eventually located the perfect home after narrowing down a number of potential houses, I moved quickly to make the purchase. The house included a large living room and a kitchen with the newest appliances, and it was south-facing with plenty of sunlight. Additionally, my mother and father had separate areas on the second level thanks to the arrangement, which could be adjusted for future caring needs. It gave me great confidence that I could give my parents a secure and convenient living space. To be honest, it cost a lot more than I had anticipated to outfit it with all these amenities. After making the down payment, I experienced a brief sense of relief. but the knowledge that I would eventually have to make monthly mortgage payments weighed heavily on my life. Nevertheless, I had no regrets despite this fact. Instead, I was more satisfied that I had managed to get to the point where my well-thought-out and gradually accumulated efforts were at last recognized. At first, my parents were shocked and incredulous when I told them about the new property purchase. I can still recall my father's unmistakable smile as he said, "Are you really sure?" over and over. "I never thought I could live in such a splendid house," my mother remarked emotionally as she again looked at the pictures of the house, and she only whispered, "Thank you." The greatest reward for me was witnessing my parents' genuine happiness, which confirmed to me once more that this decision was the right one. Realizing that my efforts had at last reached them in a tangible way warmed my heart. Their new life began, and the relocation preparations went without a hitch. I was always pleased to see my parents sitting in the living room of the new home, looking content and at ease. I became even more optimistic about my own life as a result. However, there was a certain unease as this promising new life slowly began. I first observed my parents settling into the new home while consistently making mortgage payments. Even though the monthly payments were substantial, I gave myself encouragement by telling myself, "This is my way of giving back to them." But the chances of receiving gratitude for my work dwindled with time, and it started to feel like a given. I spent less time with my folks as my career got busy. After a while, I found out that my sister was often staying at my parents' house. Curious, I gave her a call. "Have you recently started visiting your parents' home every day? How is your flat doing?" I inquired. Then, without warning, she answered, "I've left the flat. I've made the decision to move in with them going forward." "What? Why so abruptly?" "Well, a number of things were involved," she remarked carelessly. "Anyway, that's the situation." And for a time I was speechless. I felt a little uneasy since it seemed strange that my sister was also residing in the house I had purchased for my parents. I questioned whether she truly understood the weight of my responsibilities, the internal struggles it caused, and the choice I had taken only to please our parents. In addition, I found it disconcerting that my parents had not told me beforehand that my sister would be moving in. I may have felt differently if there had been even one word of consultation. In my thoughts, I rolled over. It weighed heavy on my heart at that point, when I felt like my life was only about making money. There has been a disturbing unrest in my heart ever since my sister moved in with my parents. This is particularly evident whenever my parents tell me how easily my sister has settled into the new home, acting as though she had lived there all along. As soon as I heard that, a tiny ache began to grow inside of me. It was difficult to categorize this emotion as either anger or jealousy, since it was a little different from both and was a complicated sensation that was difficult to express. Unable to control my emotions, I made the decision to spend the next weekend at my parents' place. When I arrived, I sat down next to my sister in the living room where she was unwinding and watching TV. I then took advantage of the opportunity to ask the question that had been bothering me. Hey, why did you leave your apartment? Did your parents say anything to you?" "Because I was having a tough time with money," my sister said carelessly, grinning slightly. "I assumed you would automatically agree when Mom and Dad agreed I could live here." The slight ache in my chest suddenly grew larger and put a lot of pressure on it. It seems that I had been entirely excluded from this conversation between my sister and my parents. Her statements made me feel even more uneasy. I had to put in a lot of work and sacrifice when I purchased this house. After working hard hours and on vacations, I was able to eventually buy the house. However, it felt normal for my sister to reside here inside the family, a concept. I just couldn't see why my sister could be allowed to reside here without taking me, the investor, into account. To me, this home was more than simply a structure. But it's not that my sister was at fault. She was only doing what our parents said. It was a representation of my pride and the culmination of my work. I was reluctant to share it readily, even with my sister, because of this. I so made the decision to also ask my parents. "Mom, I heard Nicole is living here now. But why didn't you tell me anything? My mother started talking with an uncomfortable face when I inquired. Because you seemed busy, I thought I shouldn't trouble you with it. I felt powerless after hearing these remarks. Despite my busy schedule, I felt bad for missing this crucial choice. I spoke with my father as well. The statement, "It's natural to help each other because we're family," was unambiguous. The fact that I couldn't argue with it annoyed me. Yes, perhaps we should help one another since we are family. I was unhappy, though, since it seemed like my sentiments and obligations as the one providing for them were being disregarded. I became aware of a slow shift in the mood at home a few weeks after my sister and dad moved in together. My sister was mainly absent and did not assist with household tasks, even though she was frequently at home. Despite having a profession, she appeared to spend much of her time lounging in her room and making no contributions to home costs. I couldn't help but feel dissatisfied as this scenario persisted, and she made no contribution to the house's bills. My uneasiness just intensified. I felt as though an uneasy sensation had taken hold of me. I eventually told my sister how I truly felt one day, which was made worse by my work-related stress. Have you ever thought about how much effort I put into purchasing that home? You make no contribution to living expenses and don't even appear to be looking for a new apartment, while I continue to pay the mortgage. It's difficult, to be honest, and I feel like my efforts are being disregarded. There was a little pause before my sister, who appeared astonished, responded in a tiny voice. I didn't know you felt that way, but buying the house was your decision, and it's hard for everyone, so I was just overwhelmed with my own issues. When I heard this, I understood why my emotions had burst. I wanted my sister to recognize and comprehend the ideas and work I had placed into that house. I became acutely aware of the value of limits in family relationships as a result of this occurrence with my sister and parents. Sharing everything should not be taken for granted just because we are family. Instead, we should strengthen our bond while honoring one another's sentiments and efforts. I'm not sure how my connection with my sister will develop in the future, but I might be able to mend our relationship if I slowly let out the anger I've been suppressing. However, that day was a watershed in my life. A housewarming celebration was thrown by my parents. The first thing was that I wasn't invited. I might not have felt such intense loneliness and sadness if it weren't for that incident. But the world was cruel and unforgiving. My parents told me they were throwing a housewarming celebration about a month ago. I felt nothing at the moment. As they stated, the house is new, so let's celebrate grandly. I of course agreed and made plans to change my schedule so that I could go. Days went by though, and I never heard anything regarding the date of the event. I began to feel uncomfortable since I had anticipated being welcomed. During a long overdue trip home around 2 weeks ago, I saw a change in the quality of my family time. My parents, who used to talk and laugh a lot, suddenly appeared a little aloof. My sister's eyes were piercing, but I ignored them. Despite this pain, I believed it may be a figment of my imagination, but the lack of contact validated my assumptions, so I made the decision to act. After some deliberation, I made the decision to visit my parents' house one day. I didn't message or phone them beforehand. The house was buzzing when I rang the doorbell and walked in without warning. My sister and dad were occupied with setting up the catering and decorating. My sister was standing close by when I went up to her. "What are you doing?" "How does it appear?" "We're getting ready for the housewarming celebration. The visitors will be here shortly," she answered. In shock, I managed to utter the words, "I didn't get any notification." "We didn't send one," she said icily. "Do you need to be invited? Your role is over." Her cruelty left me stunned, and a cold feeling crept into my chest. I said instinctively, "What?" However, my sister's gaze was fixed on a distant object. With their eyes fixed on me, my parents both spoke to me without raising their faces indifferently. "We've raised you and paid your university tuition, so this is the least you can do," they said. My heart felt an unfathomable shiver after hearing those words. They seemed to be indicating that I was no longer required. "Your role is finished," My sister said icily. Leave the home. Her comments struck a chord in my heart and reverberated in my ears. The icy look on my sister's face and her remarks sounded pointless, or was it just me? My parents were also present, but they remained silent and laughed. I was unable to control my growing grief and rage. It is impossible to express how frustrated I felt to be treated as though my 10 years of hard work and sacrifice for my family had been in nothing. I didn't, however, express my emotions publicly. I made a decision in my heart at that same time. I had made it this far without telling my family that I owned the house, but I could not afford to keep quiet any longer. At that moment, I pulled out the house deed and held it up to them. This house belongs to me, and I have no plans to change that. For this residence, I have been making all of the mortgage payments. I firmly said, "You've been living here because I permitted it." My sisters' and parents' faces twisted. I interrupted my sister as she attempted to protest. "If you intend to kick me out, it's simple. You are the ones who will leave this house." They gave me a disbelieving look, but I persisted without flinching, demonstrating my resolve. "You should have at least expressed thanks if you wanted to stay here, but that opportunity is no longer available. I won't be your sacrifice anymore." I then granted them a grace time to leave the residence after legally informing them, through a lawyer, that they had to do so. I didn't change my decision, even though my sister and dad shouted and pleaded with me, exhibiting a range of emotions. I told myself that in order for me to advance in life, this was a necessary step. They were forced to leave the residence at some point. My sister complained and insulted me at the homes of our relatives after they were forced to leave. According to her constant claims that they were treated unfairly, she abruptly ejected us from the house. But over time, our family members started to see the reality that my sister had left her apartment without any prior arrangement, and that the whole family had been relying on me without question. It also came to light that I had taken on a large mortgage and 10 years of work to purchase the property and sustain the family's way of life. The relatives ultimately began to doubt my sister's narrative because of the discrepancy between her statements and my behavior. A few of them even contacted me to ask me to explain the issue. I calmly and emotionally described the conditions around the house acquisition, as well as my sister's and parents' opinions. Consequently, the family members supported my position and criticized my parents and sister for their over-reliance on me and lack of appreciation. As a result of these truths being made public, my sister's activities caused the family to become estranged. They also grew estranged from our relatives as I broke up my relationship with them. Following this, my sister and dad were in serious financial trouble. My mother initially had trouble keeping up with living expenditures and turned to family members for assistance. But because of their self-centered behavior, they received a chilly reception and were mostly shunned. My father and sister likewise didn't get much help from our family. My mother sobbed as she apologized to me several times. However, I didn't answer. I've cut off all communication with my sister and dad ever since. Our family's once strong tie, which was characterized by support between relatives, totally broke down due to merciless acts. I nonetheless proceeded steadily to the following step without taking a step back. I quickly contacted experts and began the process of selling the property after I stopped making mortgage payments. I evaluated the house's condition and worth and got it ready for the market after making sure there were no legal concerns. With this choice, I'm starting over. I kept telling myself that although I couldn't take back the past, I knew that in order to imagine the future, I had to act for the present. I came upon a piece of news one day that would completely alter the course of my life. According to the report, the real estate market was surprisingly flourishing, and the land value in the neighborhood where I had purchased my home was rapidly increasing. I felt as though a current had passed through my head as I heard this information. I had never given the worth of my home any thought until that point. It was something I had bought only to provide my family a cozy place to live. When I received the evaluation findings a few days later, I was astounded. About 10% more than the purchase price might be obtained if the house is sold. Furthermore, given the strong demand for homes in the neighborhood, the selling price can rise even more under certain circumstances. This information gave me hope that the challenging times I had been through were coming to an end. I made the decision to sell without hesitation, and I started the arrangements right away. My hands worked swiftly through the many duties that needed to be completed, including gathering paperwork, checking the house, and negotiating with real estate agents. After many weeks, the day came to finalize the house's sale. I took the papers in my hand and slipped out of the home by myself that morning. I believe that I was not the same person I once was when I looked into my family's eyes. They may have thought I was a cold-hearted person, but they were unable to comprehend how much their behavior had hurt me. I had made a clear commitment to act mercilessly, to break with the past, and to go forward into the future. The outcome exceeded expectations as the house's ultimate selling price was almost 15% greater than the original acquisition price. I first achieved financial freedom by paying off the long-standing mortgage in full with that money. My sister and dad were still having trouble finding a new house, according to family members I spoke with in the meantime. It was hard for them to find a good place to live without a lot of money. Family members and neighbors started disparaging my mother, saying things like wasting her daughter's efforts and losing an important house for their own selfish desires, which caused her to lose the tranquil days she had previously enjoyed. She had never felt such intense social pressure before, and these critiques began to eat away at her heart. Even though my sister was somewhat aware that her careless actions were to blame, she was still unwilling to acknowledge her own shortcomings. In addition, my parents were at their wits' end, and her spending patterns remained unchanged, with living expenditures sometimes coming short and a spendthrift like my sister adding to the strain by indulging in pricey hobbies and clothing. The pensions my parents received were insufficient to maintain even a modest lifestyle. Over time, my parents' little savings started to deplete. My sister's carefree attitude of "it'll be fine" persisted even after being encouraged to save, which put further strain on my parents. Due to this circumstance, my parents had to go back to work in order to help pay for their living expenses. Nevertheless, there were few employment available to them in their latter years, so my mother had to take up strange part-time work, and my father was compelled to perform physically taxing light labor. Nevertheless, because of my sister's persistent spending, the income-to-expense ratio was never consistent, which made living more challenging. My sister didn't really care about the reasons, and my parents, who were losing their emotional and physical reserves, frequently quarreled as family ties deteriorated. My parents' retirement funds were soon exhausted by the cumulative effect of her spending, and they began to worry about money on a daily basis. At last, the aberrations that had existed in the home came to the surface, but there was no way to fix them. My sister and my parents' relationship just became more antagonistic. The stability created by buying the property fell apart, leaving only evidence of one person placing a lot of responsibility on the other. It was true that the things they had done to me had come back to haunt them. I didn't look back as I considered the time and work I had put in for my family. Finally, I had decided to live my life for myself. I decorated the interior of my new home to my taste, making it a cozy place for me to work. In my spare time, I delighted in engaging with new acquaintances and engaging in my interests. I had finally found genuine independence and tranquility, emancipated from a family that just wanted to take advantage of me.